I think I heard you say hello.
Hey Keith, testing.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Should we be using two, or is that going to be a problem?
That one can be for the audience if they have questions. We can pass that one around.
Okay, we'll have to pass, yeah. Thank you.
Are we ready? Hey everyone, good afternoon. We have the distinct honor and privilege of being able to start this panel after everyone has had lunch and great conversation. So hopefully we will deliver for you. This is a great panel. Our focus is on artist housing and space. I had an opportunity, so I'm Megan Van Boris. I'm just your panel moderator today. I had a great opportunity to talk with our three panelists ahead of this, and it was just really exciting and energizing, all of the work that's going on. So what I'm going to do, where we're going to start, is I'm going to have each one of our panelists introduce themselves briefly, take 2 to 3 minutes to talk a little bit about the work that they do and some of their big areas of focus right now, just to kick us off and get us started. Sound good? All right. So, can I start with, let's start in the virtual space. Hey Keith, how you doing?
Hi, how are you guys?
Can you get us going with you giving yourself just a little bit of background information on what work you're doing right now, where you work, what you're doing, and what your priorities are?
That sounds great. Glad to join you. Thank you to the staff for accommodating. The era of COVID, I guess, is not over, so I did not want to come and share with all of you, but I really am sorry I'm not there. So I'm Keith McNutt. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Region of the Entertainment Community Fund, formerly the Actors Fund. And our work is really split into 2 halves. Half of what we do is helping people as a safety net in times of crisis with emergency financial assistance and social services. And the other half is helping people build a more stable life in the performing arts and entertainment. So our disciplines are radio, TV, film, music, opera, dance, and theater, and all the jobs within those disciplines. In the community and building some of our own affordable housing. So we have 1 building in Manhattan, 1 in Brooklyn, a nursing home in New Jersey, a 40-unit building for people with disabilities in the performing arts in West Hollywood, and we just completed construction on what I think might be the largest affordable housing project for artists in the state of California, which is a 151-unit building in Hollywood, on Hollywood Boulevard. It's a 2-building complex, and we can talk about that later. Is that great?
That's a great intro, thanks, Steve. I'm going to go to Sharni next.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our housing and workspace talk. My name is Sharni. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Vital Arts. I'm going to be looking at my phone because I'm a little nervous with all of you in the lights staring at me, so thank you for that. So Vital Arts came about after the Ghost Ship fire. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. The founders of Vital Arts lost their son Jonathan Birnbaum in the fire, and the kind of center of Vital Arts is really preserving and creating safe spaces for artists to live, work, and perform. Through that, we do a lot of different programming. We co-founded the Artist Space Trust with the Northern California Land Trust. Meg, the director of Artist Space Trust, is back there. Say hi to Meg. And Artist Space Trust, if you don't know, is the first of its kind, the first land trust in the country to be dedicated to artists and really keeping living space for artists forever. Big deal. If you're interested in doing work like that, talk to Meg. We also really are in a moment of building community engagement and resource distribution for artists, centered in fiscal literacy, political literacy, housing resources. really shaping the pathways between things like what Ken and Keith are doing and the artists themselves. There's a huge literacy gap between artists and, well, which we'll talk more about, but that's a lot of the work that we're doing right now. We have just started work on a big project called the Bay Area Artist Census, which we'll be talking more about soon, and most recently have done a lot of fiscal risk redistribution through previously loan programs and now grants preventing artist displacement emergency grants.
I'm going to pass it to Ken.
Hi everyone, my name is Ken Ikeda. I'm the CEO of Community Art Stabilization Trust, or CAST. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Yep. I attended Mama. So CAST is in its 10th year. We talk about ourselves actively as a living laboratory. It emerged in response and with the thought that it could provide a solution to artist displacement. And so initially the first few projects, which have now matured after 10 years, we're focused on smaller single occupancy buildings. So Common Pulse in the Tenderloin is an example of that. The Luggage Store off Mid-Market in San Francisco is another example of that. And we're really trying to model a leaseback model for ownership. So we come in and essentially be a homeowner and allow the time and readiness for those organizations to buy it back. We have been attempting to implement what we think is a fairly unique measure or requirement, which is a deed restriction to make sure that these buildings maintain their purpose, their core function and use as an art space. So it's another thing we're doing. But after 10 years, and what I hope to address today or contribute to the conversation is just we're in this unprecedented moment in the real estate market. So I might, today at least, wear my economics cap, given the other folks on the panel. And so we're pursuing space at scale in a wholesale approach. Not to scale for scaling's sake, but because it truly is a moment in which buildings that were $1,000 a square foot are now available for $200 a square foot or less, $100 a square foot, or even free. And of course, free is not free, but it allows a platform or foundation from which to reimagine the economics of sustainability. It allows for forever affordable space. And it frees that perpetual subsidy that someone, whether a foundation or donor, has to meet year after year to be reinvested back to the artists, to the staff, to the programs. And this applies both to housing too. We are working at scale on a number of larger projects that are many years out, frankly. A 90,000 square foot space in Pier 70. For property, we are working as part of the Black Cultural Zone Liberation Park Market Hall for a 30,000 square foot market space, which is shared infrastructure for small businesses and enterprises and artists, of course. But really, we're really sort of ramping up and trying to sprint as fast as possible to meet the moment. And that moment is let's get buildings off the market. So that's where we are now.
Thank you. You got us going sort of in the direction. I want to just talk a little bit big picture, right, before we go down into some of the specific areas. And I think you just sort of started to move us into that direction, actually. Be interested in other panelists, their thoughts, and also if you have any follow-up thoughts on what forces and trends you think are really influencing the artist housing space conversation right now, and what opportunities exist that might not have in the past as a result. So, anyone want to start?
I'll let Ken and Keith kind of talk on the economic and property level. And then I feel like the work that we are really doing is artist-centered and really trying to understand the landscape that the most marginalized artists are facing right now. So that is, BIPOC, trans, queer, precariously housed, precariously employed artists. And, I think at the big level, we're looking at California's going through a housing crisis. We have this new bond coming up. There's, the tax credits and all this real estate stuff. And then there's the people, right? There's the artists who are on the ground. Oftentimes, we just did our Artist Displacement Prevention Grant. We had it open for 10 days, received 200 applications. We're only able to give 6 grants. The over 75% of our artists were very well accomplished, like practicing, some have PhDs, awarded, like had these incredible backgrounds. 75% were, and so like beyond general LGBT were living in their cars, living in tents, and or facing impending eviction. And so we think about the housing landscape right now, or the workspace landscape, but for our community, and like I know we're kind of trying to go beyond like the starving artist narrative, and then there's the conditions that are still starving in some ways, you know? So for us, we're really trying to think about what it means to think about this issue holistically, because it's not just the buildings, it's not just providing more housing, it's not that either, it's both, right? Or all of the above. It's that we're also in an unprecedented homelessness crisis in California. We're also dealing with national anti-trans legislation that makes it harder for trans people to be housed or employed. And then on top of all of that, we think about why do people choose the arts, right? And who is choosing? If we have this huge statistic that's telling us that, 75%, 40% of our entire applicant pool was Black, and then a huge percentage are trans and non-binary, that's telling us that these people who we know are marginalized from all sorts of stuff, who we know don't have historical access to things, are also gravitating towards the arts as their means of survival and community and joy, right? And so what is the holistic housing infrastructure what are we really looking at when we're thinking about housing? Is my kind of, I know that's not like, economic forces and trends, but this is like the social and political forces that I think we have to think about.
That makes a lot of sense. Keith, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll let it point call on me when the time is right, because I'm watching me, but I can't quite see it visually, so just let me know whenever you want me to pipe in. I think there are a number of those macroeconomic things that we're in the midst of, and for a state that loves to call itself the creative capital of the world, I think it's even more incumbent upon us to be those voices that tell the story that things like affordable housing for those particularly young, creative people who are marginalized and are going to end up leaving the state is so important. So, within film and television, there is its own economic cycle that has been on an unprecedented 20-year expansion and is, according to everybody's estimation, is cycling down. So we are in the midst of kind of the normal economic cycle of film and television. We're dealing with an accelerated amount of runway production, particularly to Europe. We're looking at, whatever the influence of AI is going to be, and we're looking at, 4 years of real deep economic challenge for people through the pandemic and through the strikes. So all that to say, within the film and television industry, which creates so many jobs for all kinds of artists, people are estimating anywhere between a 20 to a 45% loss in jobs in the next couple of years. And I think all of those statewide conversations about the importance of young creative people to the future of the state is really critical. I think that on the hopeful side is that, there are projects like ours that are happening, and, we started our affordable housing project 14 years ago, and it's taken a long time, but it is now there, it's full, it's got 151 artists and their families living there, a very diverse community. And before we did this, people in government in LA City and LA County didn't even know an artist preference existed in the federal funding stream for affordable housing. So we have proven that it's been embraced locally as something that the county and the city want more of. So I think, once the first one is done of this scale, I think more can happen, and we do have funding to do more. And the other thing that I would just pick up on the prior comment was, our organization was founded 140 years ago, in part because of the demonization of people in the arts. And so at that time, of course, it was theater and music and dance and opera. But the general public really saw people so much as the other, that charities wouldn't serve them, and hotels wouldn't house them, and churches wouldn't even bury them because they were unclean in consecrated ground. So I think it's a strange world where it seems like part of the country is going back to that same kind of demonization of our community, and I think it's really important that we all pull together with the message that we're not just important, we're central to the economy of the state and our communities, and I think that affordable housing set aside for especially young people who are aspiring to those careers is crucial to the future of the state.
I think it's I want to sort of continue along the line of conversation regarding fair housing and the artist preference, because it's worth it to have that conversation. And I know I can speak to it specifically from some of the work that is happening with here in Sacramento, the Capital Area Development Authority. So those of you who are in Sacramento who know that they were a key partner along with Alvin Yusefi in the Warehouse Arts Loft project and making that work happen. And they're involved in a lot of affordable housing projects. They're also beginning another project at 8th and R where they had a conversation where they're specifically going to have, I think, 120, maybe 150 units of housing on our street, which is, artists, very significant contributors along the development of that corridor here in Sacramento. So really important. And I can speak only from my own experiences providing some information as a part of that process, is that there were the folks with the partner, Mutual Housing, had seen a lot of the sort of criticism of ArtSpace and the idea of like who's actually, and I say the ArtSpace project, some of those things that are popping up around the country, and those really largely benefiting, a white Eurocentric population and not others. And so as we were having this affordable housing conversation, they were coming to me and saying, hey, what does that really look like here? Are we just devoting our efforts to continuing and sustaining this sort of thing as opposed to really diversifying it? I think thankfully in our case we were able to provide a good amount of information about the artists and the people that we were funding to really say, hey, we have rich networks that we can bring to the table and make sure that that this really is reflective of who Sacramento is, right? Like that's what it's about. But I think it's that, for me, that experience, that one experience just in that conversation and having to have the conversation and provide the data and all of that was really insightful. And I'm just curious if you all can speak a little bit to that conversation regarding fair housing and the artist preference and what you've learned in terms of the work.
Yeah, I can say CAS is really nascent in this affordable housing space. I'm kind of an open book, so we walked away from the opportunity to build housing, 110 units in East Oakland. We're still part of the project for the market law I mentioned, but it's because we didn't have the expertise. We had to understand the cost. New construction affordable housing is exorbitant. It's $1.5 million a unit for one bedroom. And so it was really beyond our skill of expertise. So listening to Keith and sharing the success they've had and the scale they've had is inspiring. And the complexity for Charmy with single unit sustaining and preservation of homes is in many ways equally as complex. So we're really in this development phase in terms of affordable housing. However, I would say that for us, we've been spending a lot of time better understanding the criteria for what qualifies as an artist, looking at New York and Boston. We're also doing a lot more aggregation and relationship building around readiness for folks who might need housing. Clearly, after 10 years, it became obvious that even if we provide affordable space, they don't live near it. That's the problem. So it took us a minute, but that's, it's really grounded, I think, in our experience. What I will say is that we're still comfortable where we are, even though we're racing to get in front of this, because I think there's a short and long-term aspect to this. Pulling properties off the market that have the ability, because of where they're zoned or how they're zoned, or even betting that zoning will change, right, allows you to more affordably convert office space to live workspace, right, to create zero commute models. So we want to grab these buildings, but we're looking at buildings with the criteria, can they be converted affordably and efficiently, right? So that could be a second phase of development. We still need to provide space for people to produce, engage, and be in community. But we're also keeping an eye towards when we have greater capacity, or in all cases, frankly, partnership, right? We are on a housing project now in mid-market, and it's with Mercy Housing. They have the expertise, they know how to do it. And there's a development partner as well. So none of these things are done alone. But for us, we're living in that sort of interim space of phase one. Let's get the properties, all of which have the potential for housing. A lot more to learn from folks like, with Keith and Sean.
All right, I just can't take it anymore. I want to see Keith, like, I know you have thoughts about this, so I thought I'd kick it your way and see what you have to say. Or Sharmi.
Or,
So I'll give you a minute. I'll give you a minute to think about fair housing and the artist's preference, and I'm going to bounce it to Sharmi.
oh, okay.
I think Keith probably has more information than I do, but the reason why we've been thinking about fair housing a lot and this artist preference is because of recent legislation that Californians for the Arts actually supported in passing. It's the AB 812, which allows for a certain percentage of housing within a certain mileage of a cultural zone to be affordable housing for artists. I think it's like 10% within 2 miles or something like that. This is new legislation. Everyone's trying to figure out how to put it, at first it felt really performative, and then it was like, oh, maybe we can do something like this, and then it's like, oh, but it's not for new developments, it's for old developments, or it's for state designated development. There's all these different things that go into what this is. It's very much the groundwork for things to build out of it. And so, as we at Vital Arts have been, talking to developers, talking to cities, talking to different groups about how can something like this be implemented, we're kind of coming to terms with that, like, this is more maybe of an allowance because of some hesitancy around fair housing for occupational preference, essentially. And so there's similar things happening in San Francisco right now around teacher housing. And so there's been a lot of pushback from, I don't know if any of y'all have been on Nextdoor, but that kind of crew. There's a lot of pushback. Like, what about fair housing? Why do you want teachers to have affordable housing? Like, well, why would it? I don't know. I don't get the line of reasoning behind that question. Similarly, there have been these efforts in San Jose and other places around the Bay Area to implement, out before AB 812 came into the picture, implement some artist housing. And then there's been that resistance around whether or not this is even allowed because it might be breaking fair housing law, which ironically is to prevent discrimination. So lots of different things at play here, and in just even thinking about like what fair housing is. I keep calling it like a cat's cradle that you have to kind of unknot to like figure out how to, get people what they need, get people housed. And Keith, I feel like because you have this huge artist affordable housing, but I'd love to hear your way of navigating that also.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Harvey. So I think I'm not sure how it's going to play out with the new California law because I'm not sure how it works with existing housing. So that part, I think, is in my mind still yet to be determined. But how we have operated, how we've created housing is through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program from the federal government. And that's the largest source of funding for new construction of any affordable housing. And within that law, there is an artist preference. So I don't know how, well, I know how the artist preference got created because Art Space was fundamental in getting that passed. But there are 3 preferences that you are allowed to build those buildings for that that are allowable within fair housing guidelines. So that's artists, veterans, and literary workers. No idea how literary workers get there, but it's, but that's what exists in the federal government. And I think sometimes in our conversations, like we love to talk about what should be and what can be and what we aspire to be. When you're building housing, you're definitely dealing with what is and trying to figure out how to navigate what exists and how do we get through this to get some housing built. So the great news is that what does exist now is this federal law allowing tax credits to be used to build affordable housing for artists. And unfortunately, it provides no other guidance than the word artist. So we put a lot of intentionality into defining that and building our arguments around the most diverse possible community of artists to whom we would be marketing these units. So we have a metric, we're happy to share it with anybody because truly, when you look at it, the arts community reflects the greatest diversity of LA County, certainly the state of California and the whole country. And that's the basic argument that has won most people over, is that even with an artist preference, you're looking at a huge swath of people across the community. So we defined that artist preference as encompassing performing arts and entertainment workers, media arts, interdisciplinary art, literary, visual, and folk and craft arts. And we defined a very specific way to understand who is earning money. So there's a set of earnings criteria. Have you earned money in your craft in 3 out of the last 5 years? And if you perchance don't have paperwork in your back pocket, people also submitted portfolios of their work, and a committee of local artists and staff got together every week for 4 months to look at people's commitment to their craft in a professional way. Not judging anyone's art, but just their investment in it, their time commitment, training, any kind of mentoring, things like that. So, and the trick with any kind of affordable housing that I know of is, in order to comply with fair housing, the only way you can influence the pool of applicants is through marketing. And once an application is in, if they put a middle initial in their name on one page and they don't put it on the other, you're gone. You cannot give anyone any help once they submit the application, because that's preferential treatment. So the whole focus on achieving diversity in your buildings and in our building was marketing. So we hired a marketing staff person 6 months before the applications were due. We've been doing trainings for people on how to apply successfully for affordable housing for 25 years. And we put those into play. We trained 1,200 applicants on how to complete the applications. And we expanded our network of organizations that we were partnering with from 400 to about 625 around LA County, and had everybody putting the word out. We got 9,100 applications for those 151 units. 5,700 of those self-identified as artists. Those people went into the lottery, and that's when you really cross your fingers and say, oh my gosh, are we going to achieve this critical, essential need of diversity in this community? And I have to say, that marketing process that we went through, that education process on how to complete the applications, it worked. And I think we can say, and anybody who wants to do this around the state can say, that putting in this energy actually works. And we submitted a demographic report that you guys can, everybody can have access to. But basically, We've got, of those 151 artists, 75% are people of color. They're all low and moderate income, between 30% and 80% of area median income. There are 23 fully ADA compliant units for people with full disability status. And we've got more than 60 professions represented in those 151 artist households. So it's an incredibly diverse community of creative people. And I think that's what we have to sell to everybody when we're talking about fair housing, that this level of diversity is mirroring, can be achieved through effort, just conscious, intentional effort on the front end that leads to enough of a diverse pool of applicants that the people who actually get selected are a representative sample of the applicants, and that representative sample ends up being representative of the whole community. So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
That's great. I kind of want to move on a little bit from there because Keith, you were talking a little bit about readying artists to apply for affordable housing. And also, so I work for the city of Sacramento, so I feel like I'm inside the system in the ways that a lot of these things are constructed. And I know all of you are doing some level of programming designed to assist artists with navigating those processes. And I know, having been inside the system, how hard we make it for folks to be able to get through them. But I'm wondering if you might be able to share some of your insights in terms of doing that work, maybe some key things you see with artists that if there are artists in the room, maybe they might benefit from, you know, some basic insights or some basic thoughts to help them navigate.
I have so many thoughts around this because I think there's the things that, you know, artists need to know or things that artists can access in order to, you know, maybe access affordable housing or stay housed, you know your right stuff, et cetera, There's, you know, the barriers to entry for any type of housing. And then there's also what do you do if you're living in a space with a slumlord and they're doing renovations, construction while you're living there, and like, what's your way out? Litigation for a broke artist or something, you know? There's so many things, and then there's also the way in which, you know, I really feel like advocacy, organizing, community engagement. You know, the last panel was talking so much about these listening sessions. I think beyond listening sessions, really just being with people, gathering, all these things are so important because the barriers to entry are so extreme and they're not necessary. And the reason we know it's not necessary is because during COVID, all of a sudden, the barriers were lessened, right? And so I'm just gonna speak for, you know, visual artists, performing artists who live off of 1099s and contracts. You can make so much money. You could maybe have like a, you know, 50K salary, 60K salary in California, or maybe income, we'll call it income, not salary, off of 1099s and still not be approved for an apartment, right? Because you don't have a W-2. You could be a trans person and not have your ID reflected by, and this is beyond just like, you know, we all know discrimination exists, I think, I would hope so, but beyond even just, you know, the color of my skin, how I present, etc., your ID card, if it's different than what you identify as, that's a barrier for you being able to access housing, right? And so for me, like, I'm like, there's the resources and then there's also actually being aware, like us all in this room being aware of like the various levels that prevent, because we can all try and like fit the box as well as possible. And I mean, I was talking about this the other day where it's like, you know, when you talk to a nurse, you have healthcare, whatever, you talk to a nurse and they're grumpy and so you don't get what you need, or you like go to the mechanic and the mechanic is just having a bad day, so then you are not getting your car fixed, things like that, right? You can do everything right, and there can still be a barrier between you getting the service that you require, right? And so this is what is stacked for artists, is as people who are maybe arts workers, maybe 1099, maybe musician. I mean, I'm a sound artist and a musician. I played some of my first shows in Sacramento at NorCal Noise Fest with Raven Chacon, Pulitzer Prize winner, in a cafe, 12 years ago or whatever. And for us, we make our own economy, actually. We're paying ourselves. We are working our cafe jobs, paying each other at the show, charging each other like sliding scale, and then there's no infrastructure, And so if if you're living off of touring, and then you don't have even a 1099 and I'm sorry I'm going off into this realm, but I just think it's really important that we think about this issue so holistically and really think about the people who, if we're trying to provide housing, there are people who can't stay in housing, and it's not because they don't have the resources to stay, it's because the system is so easily stacked against them, And so for me, it's yes, I think that there are so many resources. I think that we do need to take advantage of, artists need to engage. Vital Arts is really, through our our community engagement, is really trying to do fiscal literacy and political literacy. Again, tenants' rights, first-time home buyer programs, getting your credit up, whatever. We're really trying to work with other organizations to build some of this stuff out. And I think it's important that we're really real about the system that we're navigating, and that us as advocates, as people who are connected in this room, are actually able to think about this on the individual and community level. Why do we gather? How do we gather? And how do we use that energy to actually change some of these barriers? If we can put people in hotels during COVID, if we can get people to not have to look at a passport or an ID to get people into housing during this massive crisis, if we're able to get people emergency rental assistance, then why can't we do that now? What's stopping us now? Why is the urgency not there? Anyway, sorry.
Keith, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share on this.
Yeah, sure. I think from a couple perspectives. So one from the individual artist perspective, I think Charlie's point's really important in that any federal system, and I sort of come at this also from a social worker perspective. I was a social worker in a HIV/AIDS program for 11 years, and it's just so apparent that there are no federal systems that are designed for 1099 workers, whether in the arts or anything else. They're all designed for the broadest part of the population, the most expected paperwork that they see. So anything that's not a W-2 usually requires explanation or additional advocacy to make sure that that person gets access to that benefit, whether it's health benefits, housing, any kind of federally based income benefits. So really important for advocates to know that 1099s freak people out. They don't understand it. Even if they want to help, they generally don't understand how to add it all up, how to think about a 2 or 3 year average of earnings instead of adding it all up and saying, oh, well, they had a great year this year, but they have 3 lousy years before that. So that concept is really important when advocating with individual artists. I think on the housing development side, we have a partnership with the City of LA in 2014. There were 3 buildings that were coming online in something called the 80/20 program, which is not a program I think I would personally recommend, because it's only a 20 to 30 year solution and then the units go back to market rate. But for 20 years, they're amazing, right? And what we found also, and that we found when we've been doing this educational process for years, is that developers don't understand 1099s either. And so if you have buildings that are coming online, private developers are involved, it can be really helpful because some developers may actually be interested in bringing artists into the affordable units they're developing, but they may have no idea how to make them eligible. They may not know how to add those up. They may not know about income averaging, things like that are possible that can help people. So those are partnerships that arts and arts advocates, organizations and advocates can have with developers that can really make a difference in terms of getting people into other kinds of affordable units that might be coming available in the community. We have been doing educational workshops. Anybody who's an artist can sign on, they're all free. We do them periodically, and they go through all of those things that an individual artist needs to know to make their application more understandable to the development world, to the developers and their staffs who are just processing applications and are looking for the easiest way out a lot of times, so, or just don't understand. So those workshops really focus on, if you want to get into affordable housing, you got to do your taxes. You know, there's just some basic things like that. We have a whole curriculum of money management classes. You know, most arts programs don't include how do you manage your money when your income is all over the place. Really crucial to set themselves up to start building credit scores, to complete taxes so that they can competitively apply for affordable housing. And then last, I think, from the perspective from us talking to government entities, you know, when we did that project in 2015, we had a number of observations about how county-wide systems can be better at helping gig workers, 1099 workers access affordable housing. And so questions to ask of your county housing authority are the marketing and leasing practices standardized so that all of the buildings building new units in your county, do they all have the same process, or is it a confusing hodgepodge? Have they clarified the expectations in their guidelines for how applicants with episodic income and fluctuating income can apply? Let's see. Do local governments honor the low-income housing tax credit artist preference? And can they? Will they? I think, are developers required in any way to attend public information sessions, training sessions on how to better manage people with 1099 incomes? So those are just a few of the recommendations.
And I feel like I think the big piece of that is that, you know, it can't actually just be us talking to county or city or state. Like we are the stewards to bring artists, give artists a seat at the table. We have to do that pathway because at the end of the day, you know, I can tell my story, I can tell my community story, but they are the ones who are really going to be able to understand if any of the solutions that we have or that the state or the city or the county have are going to be applicable to them. And if we're not giving artists in communities who never have that room, the room to actually be there, then I still am just like, you know, and I think this is really the balance between all of the different complexities within the housing sector, because it's not, you know, there's just so many different perspectives. You have TINK people, you have housing and homelessness people, you have, you know, affordable housing folks, you have the finance folks, there's so many different, the land trust, you know, there's so many different perspectives and so many different solutions. And I think for us to actually, like I just am gonna keep pushing that point because I think it's really easy for us to think that we are just this end-all representative, and we're not, you know? And so I wanna center that again.
So yeah, I was gonna ask you if you wanted to respond to this, or I wanted to hit you on the ownership front in the conversation. So, but yeah, go ahead first.
I'll be quick. I think, I don't know where everyone is in the room. I used to work in filmmaking and with high schoolers in filmmaking as well. And, a lot of filmmakers with social impact became nonprofit EDs. And it was sort of like they had to learn everything from scratch. It's a different mode of being and operating and a different knowledge set. And so I think the key word here is partnership. You don't have to have all the answers. What Keith has learned would take years and years and years of direct experience to really fully understand. But he's a resource. What I want to do is sort of pitch an invitation that I'll kind of sort of go too far. I'm going to go rogue for a second, but I want to include everybody here, which is, I think we as CAST, because we are really operating and trying to operate as a living lab, we're trying to build infrastructure that is available to everybody. So through our success and mistakes, what's learned is to leave behind infrastructure that can make it refined. So simple examples, right? So for individual artists who are not quite ready for ownership, not quite ready for running their own organization even, right? But are part of a vibrant community that have needs for space to congregate, to convene, engage. They can't get insurance, right? They don't know the permits. But there are people who hold that deep expertise and those direct relationships with people at the counter that can expedite that for you and make that so much easier. In fact, make that event happen, right? So you continue to do the things you want to do without necessarily having to directly hold all that knowledge. And that's a simple example, but there's examples all over the place with Fractured Atlas in the film space. They provide independent filmmakers with insurance. So we can scale infrastructure, we can offer to each other, and the same thing with expertise. The very quick note for us is, we have a very intentional process at CAST built around our community engagement team, and Trey and Paz are here from that group. And the idea is that you don't build space and ask them to come. You wrap the building around mission and programs. That takes time, that takes a lot of trust building. We're in an accelerated moment, like I've been saying over and over again. So it's been challenging. But the outcome of that, one of the outcomes rather, is that some people aren't ready for ownership, and that's not the right outcome for them now. It could be down the road. So just long-term affordable space actually speaks to our North Star. And that's enough for now. And you still have other options to pursue. So ownership is not really the answer for us. So I think that's been some moving places.
Thank you for that. One of the conversations that we're having, and I'll raise it, and this is facing a lot of downtowns in just the transformation on the back, right, with the pandemic and people working remote. In Sacramento, we really feel it in a really significant way because it's the state capital and we used to have 30% of the workforce, right? Like they're here and they're not now. And so there's this broader conversation, right, about what does a redefined downtown look like. And a lot of those people in those conversations are developers, and I get frustrated from time to time because I work directly with artists and some cultural organizations who are really struggling with space, and you're sort of up against this sort of power infrastructure. And I felt that, and I was telling Ken, I was on a study mission that we did. We went to Toronto, and it just happened to hit the timing of when Artscape, if any of you are familiar with Artscape, a long time working in Toronto around arts housing, a key partner, and they had so much space, and basically they overextended themselves in terms of a particular property, and so that concentration of that power within that one organization and then being overextended really put a lot of stuff at risk. Now they've transformed, so they're in the process, and I think part of that, it's really interesting, is like really distributing some of that more across, and I'd be interested, Ken, if you can maybe speak a little bit to that as it might relate to your work and what you see on that front.
We're taking an indirect path to what Keith has already done successfully, which is we want to pool our own capital. So our me in particular, my myopic focus has been how do we actually create structure to take an investment? And because we want to take a wholesale approach, right? So for us, it's if we're going to get buildings for pennies on the dollar, can we get 5 of them? 2 of them are securing the investments directly. If we default for any reason, we can sell those 2 buildings, pay off the debt, and still hold 3. that's the scale we're trying to play at right now, because then we have more opportunity than directly finance affordable housing down the road as phase 2, or to work with a partner who can then do that for us, because we're not in the development of affordable housing right now. So I think the big thing for us is, how do we actually have affordable capital available? Because right now, I heard of a project recently that was offered 20% of a short-term loan. That's criminal. That's crazy. That's exploiting this nonprofit and what we need. Philanthropy historically has been able to give program-related investments from 0 to 2%. We're looking at linked deposits. These are all things that I'm happy to share with you all later, but these are all things that are available to you. We're trying to create a fund that's available to everybody, not controlled by us, but sits directly with a series of community banks, where you can park your money and it can get matched at a low interest rate. So, we need to get back to 3 to 4% lending to actually be able to manage the debt, right? Because our economics have not been transformed to be able to scale and accommodate 20% or 10%. So again, I guess my quick ask, which I didn't ask before, is whoever wants to participate in this sharing of infrastructure, sharing of these sort of structures that can be hyper local to you, but structurally the same as anywhere else. They're really backed by federal funds, so they're available to you. And I think having direct control of the acquisition of the property lets us participate in a different way, right? And continue this theme of arts is the answer right now. So we don't need to be secondary in this development. I don't know if that directly answers it, but that's really the play. It's wholesale. We have to have pieces to move.
Yeah, I think I managed to piss some developers off recently when I said private equity is killing Main Street. But I said it was just a very real truth for the people that we serve, that they don't have access. And so I think what you're talking about is really sort of taking back that power. And I think that really resonates with me. And I think also there is some conversation for us to be had, some real conversation to be had with developers. Richard Florida, no, I'm right, so he's out there, he does a thing on the future of cities, and he says, artists are going to be your saviors. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that in Sacramento, they're tired of being the saviors. They want stability. They want stability. And, we can talk about, the potential of activating vacant storefronts, and they can say, hey, we've been here. And guess what? Where's my long-term stability? And I can speak to that even having been in Cleveland. It was the same sort of drill. So when a developer would come in to me, I worked for an advocacy organization for almost 20 years. And they would come in and they would say, hey, we've got this really great project, and we think this would be great for artists. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I know what you're doing. So the question is fundamentally, how do we begin to value creative capital? And we've been having that, and I really want to see that, at least for here in Sacramento and beyond. It's how do we really value creative capital? Because we might not have the cash, but we're creating value. We just don't have a means to capture it. And what would that look like if we tried to build a system where we're mutually, it's some sort of mutually beneficial relationship with these folks, rather than saying, hey, I got a building that's coming down. I can speak to 3 of those in recent years. Art Hotel, right? Art Street. We've got coordinates, all these examples here where it's hey, we're happy to give you the space before we transform it to something else. When do we get to a conversation with developers where it's it's not about that? Or if the reality is that they're just not going to think that way, I think that your model and others is really just hey, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And I'll just highlight, Sean Davis, who you heard from earlier, and that's exactly what he's doing with his team. It's just saying, nope, we're going to do it. And I think there is a role for government to play, and I'll add that, and then hopefully we can, maybe get a question or two. There is a role for government to play. We have Redevelopment Act successor, RASA properties in the city of Sacramento. How do people know about that? And I think that, sharing that kind of information that came up in that second conversation, right? Who is in possession of the information? What are the city's RASA properties? And where are they? And where do, when we were talking on the phone, where do we want to make a home? You were giving the example of the land nature conservancy.
But we should have, ETP, do people know ETP, Employment Training Panel?
I'll look over at Paula if she wants to be able to use that. It's not the most efficient model, but what it is an example of, I think, a reserve set aside that can be put to better use. So it's a 1% payroll tax set aside. It's been really used to incentivize corporations to make their homes in various cities in California. It's the only one in the country. New York has tried to replicate it, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And it's used to train seasonal cashiers for Disneyland. Virgin America received $20 million of their own professional funding reimbursements to stay at SFO while it lasted. It's an incredibly resourceful resource because it's flexible. We need a version of that for the arts. So this is legislation with teeth, with money attached to it. a broadband tax, whatever it is, we need that ubiquitous infrastructure tied resource that can then underwrite the work that we're doing. And so I think that it speaks to education and organizing and just this coalition of folks that's here.
So I want to just make sure we do have a couple of minutes here for questions. And I saw Ben Warren in the back, so I'm going to hit that first. Do you want to come up here real quick?
On the mic, thanks.
Yes. All right.
No problem.
Well, hello, appreciate all your expertise so far. My question is, because we're talking from a very broad, a very developer standpoint, is there any way for local property owners to even be involved with that, such as whether it's, what was that, or even a voucher program? I'm just curious what that is and how do we do that, because there's so many, we're always speaking of things that are going to be developed, but there's so many owners that would like to be involved, A, just to help remedy the issue, but two, also so we can create cultural hubs within neighborhoods that are already developed. So, if you're going to talk about, I'd love to do something, so. That's my question. So.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm Meg Scheffler. I'm the inaugural director of Artist Space Trust that was born out of Vital Arts. Thank you for the shout out earlier, Sharmi, and Northern California Land Trust. So the Land Trust and an advocacy org got together to form a nonprofit that's solution based. So I was sitting here listening, and it takes a really huge effort. Keith, what did you say, 14 years? Cass, your projects are huge. So I'm like, how many of you are sitting here being like, that's huge, like what can I do? And so this is a more manageable community level. You can build a community land trust without the government. You can build a community land trust with the support of impact investors and foundations. What a community land trust is the building of a portfolio that you steward on behalf of the community forever. This is an in perpetuity solution. And the properties coming to Artist Space Trust is starting with mutual aid. Individual homeowners, and most importantly, artists in the Bay Area who bought their houses a long time ago and don't have heirs or want to leave a legacy for artists, and their kids are fine, like their kids are fine, are donating or bequeathing their homes to the Artist Space Trust. We will split the land from the property on top of it, keep the land in perpetuity, have restrictions on what happens above. That means we're going to sell the home or rent the apartments to artists in perpetuity. So this can happen. We're going to build a toolkit to help other communities do this. We're in our pilot phase, so give us a little bit of time. But we have more interested artists who want to bequeath their properties to us, artists in their 80s and 90s. These properties are fully paid off. They know it's the only way that they've been able to stay in the Bay Area is to have this housing security. So this is a housing justice organization built through a community effort through mutual aid to start. We'll take anyone's property, but it's artists who are coming first. And the other thing I want to say in this conversation is that I think that there's a real inclination to say housing and creative space. It's on my business card. Like the first community land trust in the nation devoted to building a portfolio of permanently affordable housing and creative space. But over the course of this last year of building this pilot, that's a false thing, especially in very expensive cities, but even in rural communities. How many of you are artists in the room? How many of you actually make your art in your house? Right. And so houses are creative spaces, 100%. Composers compose, dancers choreograph in their living room. You create, painters paint in their dining room. Writers write at their kitchen table. Housing is creative space. So the preservation of housing is the preservation of creative space. And community gatherers, community activists, you're gathering people in your living room. Culture bearers, culture keepers, you're gathering and teaching in your home. I know it. and you know it. And so we know that artists need other spaces to create, but we need to start thinking about homes as also cultural and creative space. So I'll leave it at that. If you want to come talk to me, talk to me.
Is there like a website or
Artist Space Trust. Our website is going to go through a big revamp because it's all pre-launch language. And so we've really been examining who we are, how to communicate. We're going through mission, vision, and values. But we're building our property portfolio right now. And we actually don't have the capacity to onboard all the properties that are coming to us. So I bet there are people in your community that want to give you their properties. And that's Kiana Ellis over there. So you can talk to either of us, Sharni and Nika from Vital Arts. So,
The
yeah.
toolkit when it's ready, how do we get on that?
Toolkit, follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, we'll let you know when it's ready. But I'm happy to have the conversation anytime. Thank you.
So I want to just one last question because you had your hand up there. You win the prize for keeping your hand up for the longest. So one last question and then we're going to wrap.
I'll make it real quick. I'm glad that all these opportunities for housing involving artists exist, and there's been talks about like basically trying to reclaim buildings for permanent housing and things like that. But I'm concerned with some of the having some of this the affordable housing, like what you're saying, like something like 10%. Could it potentially be even discriminatory amongst the artists? Because if I was a landowner and I had to give some of my space up to an artist, I might favor the quieter ones or the ones that are going to do less damage to the building. So what are we doing to make sure that it's equitable to all types of artists, including sound artists? Also, I'm not a full-time artist. I do artists as a hobby. I work at a gallery now. But I'm learning along the way, like, oh, some of the things I'm doing in my house could void my home warranty, so I'm wondering about how we're making properties, and if we're going to be making it equitable and accessible to everybody, how we're going to retrofit places that are not only ADA compliant, but just artist compliant with linoleum floors or craft sinks, especially for inheriting old houses. Is it going to plug up if I wash my paintbrushes in the sink? Things like that. So I'm like, oh, and what does it look like if we build a sun city? Those already exist for over 55s where they don't have bathtubs. Can we get an art community where they have a studio space? The whole thing. Architectural design. This is great, but also let's dream bigger. Let's you know what I'm saying?
Don't miss that comment for the big idea open mic thing. How big was the Sun City? It's great.
That was it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Keith, anything you want to share in relationship to that question? I'm not sure if you were able to hear it.
I think Art Space is a developer that focuses on live workspace, and so their units do tend to be larger, probably more resilient. I think for us, we don't build enough housing. We feel like those few occasions we get to build them, we want to build as many units as we can. So our apartments are normal sized apartments, and we put arts amenities within the building. So, for example, the Hollywood project has an adjacent theater. We're trying to get funding for some rehearsal studios in the ground floor. But that all comes down to, all the extras come down to additional money. So building 151 units in Hollywood, the price tag is $95 million for this project. And that's just building regular, normal size apartments without some of the kinds of amenities that the speaker was talking about. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible or doable. It's just within, as you can imagine, the federal government sets limits on everything. So the income levels, the size of the apartments, the number, 25% have to be 3 bedrooms, 25% have to be 2 bedrooms. Even though we know that the majority of people that we work with are in studios and 1 bedroom, that's what they're looking for. Because 60 to 70% of the people that we serve are 1 or 2 person households. So, it's possible, but when you do any large-scale project through LIHTC, you have to compete for those tax credits, and there are scores that go up or down based on the units being too big, or the have too many amenities, or all that kind of stuff. So it is the system's pretty limiting in terms of what you can actually do, unless you're really in it for the long term. You have those funders, those private funders that can supplement the tax credit money.
So I want to wrap it there. I'm going to get in trouble with some operator. I'll be like, hey, Sarah, you have one job, right? And 9 times. No, but what a really great conversation. I feel very lucky to have had an opportunity to talk with these folks ahead of time and hear some of their really keen insights. Feel free, to reach out to anyone, and hope you got a lot out of it. And thank you so much, my colleagues.
Just to the person in the back, I don't know where you live, but there is something called Safer DIY Spaces that actually will go in anywhere and make your space, do all the fixings to make it a good live work space. That's all.